All right, everybody. We are going to get started with today's session. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Steve Ward. I'll be your host for today, and I'll be walking you through our content. A couple of housekeeping things. The session is being recorded, so we will make sure that we get you a recording of this in about 24 hours. Some team members of mine will follow up, see if you've got any additional questions, see if there's any ways we can help you. Whether you be a merchant, a QSA, a merchant acquirer, we've got a way we can help, and so we definitely want to make sure we're making ourselves available to you. As we go through the session, phones are on mute to prevent background noise. So just ask questions as we go along, and we'll get to them in the Q&A side of things. We're going to focus a lot on research in today's session, but I'm going to try and tie it into some core themes around guidance that you're receiving, for what you need to do against this digital skimming, e-skimming threat underneath the DSS, PCI DSS. I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that are underway that you may not be aware of, just in terms of changes and some commentary that's in and reviews that are happening at the Security Standards Council level. And we'll just generally try and educate you as best we can on what we're seeing out in the wild and how you can protect your organization or how you can advise organizations on how best to protect themselves. So we'll jump in. I'll give you a little bit of a cursory overview for anybody who's new to the subject, but I'm assuming most people aren't at this point in time, since this is a conversation that's been going on for the better part of a year or two, related to at least PCI compliance. It's been going on for a lot longer than that, but jump in, give you a little bit of background on us, a little bit of a background on the problem space, dig into the research that is sort of guiding our thinking and our advice, and then we'll be moving on. So, Source Defense, who are we? We are Mastercard's global partner in digital skimming prevention. Really proud of that distinction and of that honor, to be working directly with one of the leading card brands, in that way. We are so because we are an organization that's been solely focused on protecting data at the point of capture, as it's being entered into the online forms that power commerce, for the entirety of our existence. It's sort of like our core mission. Round out web security, allow you guys to put all the bells and whistles that you need into your website to power commerce and to power good experiences and to power business analytics. Help you address, what really is its own supply chain, and the third-party risk management that goes along with that. And really, if you're a zero trust shop or you're a PCI DSS focus shop or a NIST CSF shop, help you sort of like, better firm up the hygienic approach to web security, that sort of goes along with security maturity, against those frameworks, right? So that's kind of the backdrop of who we are. We're really about, data security, protecting, in this example, card data. We're also about data privacy, something that, often goes, sort of under the radar in terms of the conversation, is making sure just that the partners that are on your website that are doing all these powerful things, scraping data and trying to give you feedback in terms of what user interactions look like, and trying to track users for shopping cart abandonment and retargeting and all that, making sure they're not violating any other data privacy requirements you have, like HIPAA, GDPR, things of that nature, because they are doing some powerful stuff, and that means they are reading and collecting data that you may not even be aware of, and ultimately helping with compliance. And when we talk about compliance, obviously PCI is a big focal point. That's the conversation for today. But again, it's the GDPR, it's HIPAA, it's FFIEC. This touches on a lot of various different compliance frameworks. And so, addressing the problem for PCI actually has added benefit of really putting you in a better posture for other things that your organization may have to address, dependent upon the types of services that you sell, or the goods that you sell, and what independent sort of market category you fall into. We as an organization are a PCI compliant organization. We have a SAC-D, multiple years now with a SAC-D. We did our first with the support of IBM as our QSA. We're a PCI PPO, which means that we are a principal participating organization. We're in the back rooms with the PCI Council. We're discussing, changes, and we're providing guidance from our perch. I also sit and our company sits on the PCI board of advisors. So we're plugged in. We know what's going on. We're leading from the front. We've got really solid partnerships, not just with MasterCard, but Fiserv and others in the space, all up and down the payment ecosystem. And so we kind of know what we're talking about on this problem. And that's why calls like today are important. We want to educate you. We want you to have the best knowledge you can have. And a lot of it doesn't get passed down without sessions like this. And so we're going to talk about the threat research that we see, the things that we, are tracking in terms of changes in adversarial tradecraft, and ways that you need to, sort of, maybe bolster or, extend beyond what you might have already done if you have taken steps, to address the problem already, with a couple of different approaches that are out there. So we'll get into that. But, ultimately, fundamentally, what this whole problem results from is all of the code that's running on your website. There's a lot of it, and most of it you don't own. You actually, if you don't know this, your website is actually a hodgepodge of, some of your own content, about 18% that, on average, is written internal, and then 82% that's brought in from all other sorts of partners making this, digital supply chain. And that is analytics tools and increasingly AI tools, chatbot, that is Google Analytics, that is, customer support capabilities, that is ad tech, it is video players, it is all the connections to social and all the interactions that are there, the metapixel, all of this stuff, right, is served up to each and every single one of the consumers that you do business with every single day, millions of times a day, potentially, depending upon how big your online commerce, game is. And all of it is really powerful because it's JavaScript. And that means, it can kind of do anything it wants when it's on the web page. And that's what makes it bad, when an adversary can compromise one of your supply chain partners, one of these people that are plugged in, and change what their code is doing, because that's what enables a lot of the bad things that result in digital skimming, mage cart, e-skimming, form jacking, click jacking. All these are names that are synonymous basically with the same threat surface. When a bad guy compromises JavaScript on your site, whether it's yours, first party, or whether it's from those partners, third party, they can do a lot of different things that are really bad. They can change your page content. They can put, new checkout flows in place, and they can redirect visitors to websites that are spoofed and mirrored to look like yours. They can overlay fake, payment iframes. They can add content to fields that, asks them for PII that you wouldn't have been asking for, record keystrokes. And ultimately that's what they're trying to do, is skim out, the data and capture and exfiltrate that data, increasingly through, some pretty sophisticated exfil channels that hide themselves in the noise, and prevent you from having the ability to like truly detect it. And so without the capability to sort of manage all of this JavaScript that's running and loading and being served up to your consumers, you don't have a lot of visibility. You definitely don't have a lot of, security control over it. And you do have a tremendous amount of risk, because what's happening is these attacks are happening all over the place, all over the world, indiscriminately across all various different industries. And it has ultimately become like the number one form of fraud, with all of the changes that were made over the last, decade, right? As it relates to the way shopping happens and the way card not present, has become sort of like the only or the easiest way to, skim card data. It's happening all day, every day. We're seeing it all day, every day. We're helping our clients fight it, and it's something that you really, really need to get a hand on, and really need to not look at as a one and done kind of process. You're going to need to evolve with the threat and understand and move and change as the adversary changes, because they are, keen to overcome the capabilities that we've put in place, and are never going to go away, because there's just too much, at stake in terms of, the value that they can derive from stealing this data. So, the council obviously took action. The card brands have taken action. Visa started warning about it way back in 2022. I like this quote because, even though it's old, it actually is like, I think, one of the best quotes from, the one of the leading card brand about what's going on. your ecom platform is being targeted. It's those third-party code integrations, those partners that that you have. Those are the most common tactics utilized, in terms of attacking your e-commerce environment. They're targeting those supply chains and those third-party service providers, and they are exhibiting continued interest in account data and personally identifiable information theft. And we're seeing some different changes in terms of some of the data that adversaries are trying to steal, but ultimately it's card data and PII that they're after. And that resulted, MasterCard, Visa, everybody at the card brand level saying, got to make change. Vendors in the space like us saying, got to make change. A lot of payment PFIs, forensic investigations showing this threat. The council took action, and in 4.0.1, they basically said, look, you got to have controls in place, and you should have had those controls in place as of a year ago and 4 months ago, April 1st of 2025. But I realize, and so too does the community, right, that not everybody's compliant day one. Still a lot of organizations out there that are trying to address the threat. Still a lot of organizations out there that maybe put a band-aid on it last year that really need to get more sophisticated in terms of their approach. And that's what we're here to help you guys figure out, right? But they said, hey, you got to do something about this. And what they said is, you got to maintain an inventory of everything that's on your payment pages, all payment page scripts, justify the fact that they're there and should be there, confirm that somebody's authorized it, what's running, it's being fed over to the consumer in these browser sessions. You got to have a way to make sure they can't be compromised and to assure that the integrity is intact, and that you can alert and respond to any of that compromise in a fast, rapid fashion. You got to monitor payment page headers at least once every 7 days, probably the most onerous, time-driven requirement underneath the DSS. It's even more so than the ASV scans you guys are used to, right? This is weekly, not quarterly, that you got to have monitoring in place. And so they gave you, a lot of requirements, and the DSS in its current form, gives you some guidance. And we're going to deconstruct some of that based on the threat research and see whether or not that stands up, and show you where the bad guys are kind of like skating around the lines that we have drawn. One thing I would say is that, we talked to a tremendous amount of QSAs. I think some of our QSA friends are on this call today. We've heard from them some concerns that they had, and it may be part of what you experienced and maybe why you're on this call. That post dating, that future dating of these requirements really hurt industry adoption. Changes to the SAC-A in February of last year really hurt industry adoption. The use of a shell game to advance rocks before the April 1st deadline to buy a year, really I think was something that was happening at least very prevalently at the, level one big box, merchant kind of category. It may have been that because there were 52 changes in 4.0.1, you put this off. But the comment here is what's important. The risk is real. The threats are serious. This is a dangerous game. And that's what we're seeing, held out in all the threat research that we see out there. So you got to stop if you've been putting this off, kicking this can down the road, because you're exposing your organization to the problem. And you're not alone. We did some work with MasterCard and looked at 10,000 sites around the world, and a lot still don't have any security in place at all. Of those that did, put something in place, largely an emphasis on content security policy, or CSP. And with CSP, there's some serious issues, and we'll talk through those. But even where we found CSP, even the deployment of CSP itself was not done correctly in such a way where violations would be blocked, only logged. And so there's a lot of ground we have to cover. And if you need convincing internally, this next section of the conversation is going to help you there, right? So I'm going to go through a quick synopsis of what we saw all last year, and then we provide threat research, against what we do in Q1, Q2. We'll do another update in Q3. This is stuff that we're seeing in the wild. Our teams are researching the threat. They're out there trying to find, what the adversary is doing, making sure that our product, which helps you do all the things that, were outlined, in terms of inventorying and justification and reporting, and also blocking, malicious activity. Our guys are always trying to make sure that we're up to speed. And so I would say we're probably amongst, the leaders in threat research. And so in 2025, we saw proliferation, a gaining of sophistication in terms of e-skimming attacks, way more activity in that space. We saw attacks being crafted to evade controls that were outlined like CSP and SRI in the DSS. We saw a false sense of security being created as a result. Adversaries shifting focus not just to card data, but other forms of data theft that are still important to you, even though it's card data under the DSS that you're trying to protect. Things like trying to break into your loyalty programs, stealing credential data so that they can conduct fraud against your organization with what looks like, a trusted and known consumer. We're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing a lot of like persistence capabilities being built into the threat now, very much taking a cue from like the APT, advanced persistence threat style of adversarial tradecraft that traditionally had been kind of like reserved for nation states. We're seeing a lot more emphasis on that. In Q1, we saw not just third-party scripts getting hit, but a bunch of first-party scripts, which means their renewed capability to break in through your server-side controls, right, and get in there and attack you through compromised server or like literally from within the house, right? We're seeing more and more of that happening in Q1. We saw a lot of silent skimming. It used to be, thinking that like there was this double overlay kind of thing that like was kind of the only way an adversary could skim out this data, and that double overlay, which I'll talk through an example of, would flag, consumer concerns back to you as the brand and say, hey, something's wrong with your website. We're seeing that going away. We're seeing a lot more silent skimming. We're seeing pixel perfect payment page spoofing, and effectively completely finding ways to bypass embedded iframes from your payment service provider, and I'll talk through that. Attacks in the thousands. In 2025, we saw about 12,000 attacks in the wild. In Q1, we saw about 2,000, I think, was the number that we saw. Which would be doubling of the attack pathway that we saw in 2025. We're seeing these attacks hit big companies, big brands, as well as mom and pops. So across the sort of like broadness of the different client types or organization types, we're seeing attacks. We're seeing CSP bypass as a major theme, along with actually weaponizing CSP, and I'll talk through that. And what all of that showed us, and 2025 combined with Q1, was that this focus only on payment page security is not adequate to defeat the threat. And I'll talk through the types of site-wide, attacks that adversaries are using. So I'll give you a quick deep dive on 2025, Q1 2026. Then I'll get you into the Q2 data, and then we're going to marry all of that into so what does it mean? What do we got to do? How do we do things better based on all this, right? So in 2025, tens of thousands, as I mentioned, sites attacked. Everything from one-to-many attacks. If they compromise one plugin, let's say you use a plugin or a partner, a third party that another 100 retailers do or another 1,000 merchants do. If they can hit you in one-to-many, they will. So they compromise and basically poison the source. And then go after, indiscriminately. Like you may not have been the target, but because you're using that plugin or because you're using that third party, they get access to your site, as a result of just compromising. So they're looking for popular plugins. They're looking for obscure or up and coming tech that you're integrating in your website, because those firms, the smaller firms that are out there, more fly by night, more responsive in terms of like new market opportunity, maybe don't have the broadest security posture. And they're hitting everybody from fashion and apparel to travel and leisure to transportation, media, government services. In Q2, we even saw some big attacks against the U.S. car manufacturers. In 2025, we found almost 100 distinct campaigns, and that means 100 different threat actors with 100 different, sets of TTPs going after, diverse set of targets. And so there's a lot of players in this space. There's a lot of bad guys out there, and increasingly we're seeing more enter in, because we saw the construction of like this modular attack infrastructure at the tail end of 2025, which gave an indication that there's more of a software as a service kind of focus that's happening. And I think there's some other examples of that, just pulled from last quarter, where the bar of entry is being lowered. The capability for the bad guy is being lowered, especially with AI generative malware. And so more and more players are getting in the space. And so you're going to see more attacks, not fewer. We also saw this emerge in 2025, and we have seen it hugely pronounced through the last 2 quarters, the use of Google Tag Manager, or at least in some cases masking Google Tag Manager, to help drive both the deployment of malware, and to get the skimmers on site, as well as to hide in plain sight amongst the trusted sources that you're out there. As I mentioned, a lot of campaign activity in 2025. We saw a thousand sites compromised in a single campaign, 15 different languages in that campaign, localized attack modules, so they're able to read, where your consumer is coming from if you're a multinational, and they're able to, craft, the attack, based on localization. We saw, industrialized scale. We saw attacks across the entire site, not just the payment pages. And I think that's really, really critical to understand. Not just payment pages. They aren't just compromising a single portion of your site. They're attacking the whole of the site, because that allows them the foothold they need to do anything that we want, against that list of, bad things that I mentioned, in the green Mr. Yuck. We also see lots of different payment platforms. Like you may have heard MageCart, because that's came from Magento or Adobe Commerce. It's not just MageCart that's being attacked, or it's not just Magento or Adobe Commerce that's being attacked. It's all different payment platforms that are being hit. In Q1, as I mentioned, almost a doubling of the pace. So instead of just 12,000 attacks, it looks like they're on tune for about 24,000. We saw one campaign compromise 2,000 sites in just a single scoop, and that was small and large organizations, a top U.S. bank, a top global supermarket, thousands of small merchants, who were actually de-scoped under changes that were made to the DSS underneath the SAC-A. An 18% reinfection rate. We went back and we looked at known victims in 2025, and we found 18% of those known victims had actually been re-compromised using entirely new malicious code. And so what does that say? It says whatever controls were put in place were not adequate to detect the attempt to reinfect. The fact that 57% of those reinfected sites used entirely new malicious code also means it may not have been the same adversary coming back. It may have been a new adversary. And so threat actors, can hit you multiple times, the single threat actor, or there's another bad guy waiting in the wing that can come back at you. APT style attack remediation and anti-remediation techniques. First and third party services weaponized. Legitimate services, the trust that you have in these services is what's being compromised. And that's what's getting, the bad guy into the bloodstream, right? In Q2, we've seen, a similar uptick. We've seen just as many, sites being compromised. We've seen an increase in capability. There was one really, really interesting attack that happened that actually targeted, the Bitcoin side of things. Pushed through Polymarket, which is an exchange, for crypto. In this particular case, we saw more than 100 commerce sites get caught up in the attack, but they weren't the target of the attack. The target was very specifically trying to go after Polymarket wallets. But the fact that e-commerce sites were hit and scooped up in it is a good indicator of exactly what I'm trying to tell you, which is sometimes the bad guy is just going after, in this case, I believe it was like an email marketing partner, and compromising the script of that email marketing partner very specifically to go steal, a crypto, But they landed on consumer-facing merchant websites as well, which gives them a foothold once they get there to do anything else that they want. In this case, though, the reason I bring it up is because there were some really interesting things happening. There were 15 different smart contracts that were tied to this campaign. There was a Google Tag Manager container that was used across, all the sites. There was the use of Google Analytics to fragment stolen information. Really interesting stuff, that, just says the bad guys are getting smarter, stronger, and they're using more of our trusted infrastructure, right? To both deploy the attack and then to exfiltrate data. And in this particular case, this attack chain used 7 different trusted services. So it used Google Tag Manager to basically initiate the execution and unpack. It used Google Analytics to monitor activity and also to hide and carry data. It used Firebase to deliver payloads. It used Firestore to stage data and config. It used Ethereum Sepolia to basically choose command and control routing or to do round robin if any of their command and control channels got burned. And then it used alternate browser channels and payment APIs to normalize exfiltration. And so it was basically designed to use all of the things in the trusted stack, right? To help unpack, to help target, to help steal, and then to help hide the exfiltration of the data. And these are all things that we need to be aware of. And I bring it up primarily because I think there's this over reliance on CSP or CSP related tools, and we'll get into it here in a slide or two. But CSP really, uses that trust network and that trust status to kind of tell you, well, don't worry because this is a person or this is a service you trust or this is Google and you shouldn't be concerned. But all the evidence is showing us that just can't be the case, right? Modern skimmers, right, are assembling attacks at runtime. And so what's happening is, a trigger will wait for some kind of action to take place on the part of the user. And so, like in the case of, I don't know, clicking on a checkout button, right? Or adding things to a shopping cart. And then what will happen is that trigger event will resolve the configuration and activate and change for payload assembly. And that's going to adapt to the shopper, the payment provider, the page structure, the wallet, the geography, the time of day, etc., to basically create the ruse that allows the skimmer to take place without the consumer knowing. This is stuff that's happening, and it's really sophisticated stuff that's happening and giving, new capabilities to the bad guy because we're putting over reliance on sort of whitelisting services. And I'll be cognizant of time where I'm about halfway here. I'm going to jump forward a little bit. Traffic can be, and is, not can be, is hidden inside the legitimate telemetry, and that is something that is really, really important to note, is that the bad guys are starting to do more and more obfuscation of this data so that it looks like legitimate traffic, and other tools that you have in place do not flag it. So I'm going to jump forward here. Let's get into what's going on. So if you look at 4.0.1 and you look at what is prescribed underneath it, there are some real significant concerns that we have. Now, we have provided that feedback in our role as a member of the board of advisors. We just went through a call for comment from the council. I believe it was about a month and a half ago that maybe about a month ago that commentary period closed. We know ourselves, along with other leading QSAs, along with other leading vendors in the client-side security space, along with our partners like MasterCard, have tried to educate and make change in those comments. We think that based on where the timelines, typically, resolve out in terms of modifications that the council makes, to the standard, that you should expect to see something either before the end of the year, kind of timed, towards just post Christmas season, or likely in the Q1 timeframe. And I'll know more about that with the community meetings that are coming up. I'll be in Scotland. I'll be in Vancouver. There's a board of advisors meeting in Scotland. I'll find out a little bit more there. Let's keep in touch, and I will definitely let you know if I hear anything in terms of the timing. But we think that some changes should be made to hopefully overcome the stuff that I'm about to go through, because right now we think that there's a misunderstanding of the threat. We think there's guidance that's a problem, and we think that you as a merchant are being steered in the wrong direction, and you need to know, what not to do so you don't have to go undo it, right? Right now 4.0.1 really relies on a myopic understanding of tradecraft, and it does not reflect any of the stuff that I've been talking about, in terms of what we're seeing. It is written 4 years ago, and really has not been modified since. And a lot has changed in the world in terms of what the bad guys are doing. And even at the time, there were some problems with the understanding of the problem. The wrong controls are being emphasized. And so, if you just read the DSS and you pop off with what, you see there, you're going to get, yourself in a lot of management work for technology that won't do a lot to really protect you. And lots of people have been warning about that across the community. This isolated focus on payment pages is a real concern. Your a threat surface is your website, not a particular page on your site. When they put out the SAQA change, which has now, I think, been modified, and if you guys aren't keeping track, you really need to, for the way certain things happen related to the standard. You'll have guidance documents, and then you'll also have FAQs that come out. And there was an update to FAQ 1331, which enabled organizations to then decide what reporting mechanism to use. That really changes the SAC-A kind of conversation. I'll get into that when I get deeper into it. But the stuff they put out last year said, well, maybe you don't need to do it if you're a small merchant, and all things indicate small merchants are square in the target hairs here from the adversaries. And there's loopholes that shouldn't exist because of it, and that's not really what this is about. We're not about compliance for the sake of compliance, or a bunch of stuff to do for the sake of saying you did them. We're trying to secure the data environment that transacts card data, right? And so we shouldn't have these things happening. There's some stuff that's got to get dealt with, and we really need to be focused on delivering real security. So let's unpack that. Controls that don't control. Okay, so if you read the DSS as it says today, you're going to see references to content security policy and SRI, as 643.11.6.1. These are the controls that are good reference controls. And a lot of merchants have said, great, okay, so I'm going to go build a content security policy. We talk to merchants every single day. We had one on the phone yesterday morning. They own something like 47 different brands around the world. And they have, something like ridiculous, like 120, 150 different domains, different websites that they manage. And they're managing all of this with a content security policy at each individual website level, because they read in the guidance that CSP and SRI were effective controls to combat e-skimming. They are not. I will say that super loud. CSP and SRI, or any tech built on CSP and SRI, will not stop this threat. It just won't do it. And that is because of everything we just talked about, right? CSP and SRI are static controls. They don't track the evolving landscape. 80 people said this, as part of this e-commerce guidance task force. CSP requires a whitelist. I will allow these services to run on my website. And it requires continuous updates if the service changed, or else that might create breakage. But it lacks and completely, totally, misses the point and misses the plot on the fact that it is the behavior of the script, not the source of the script, that we are trying to control. And so in the cases that I've given you, where very, very highly trusted things like Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, these scripts, are being compromised. What you're seeing is a false sense of security and allowing the Trojan horse, into the environment. SRI takes a different script flip on it, and what it does is it looks to create a hash or a fingerprint for every script that runs. And that's near impossible because of the fact that these scripts change dynamically. And so they are never look the same, because there's thousands upon thousands of dynamic changes that happen, in the scripts that are running on your website on a daily basis.
A core author to the DSS, 4.0.1, who basically had his fingerprints all over, has said, finally, I was wrong. CSP and SRI do not control this problem. They shouldn't have been in there. The inclusion, is misleading merchants. And we have said, hey, council, get it out of there. They have yet to do so. Hopefully, they will in the near term with these changes I'm talking about coming down the pike. You should eliminate the thinking around CSP and SRI as a control for this problem and do not waste your time going down that runway. Okay. Scott, who's my colleague, he'll throw a link up here for this white paper, but it's a good white paper on CSP and SRI versus a behavior based approach, to e-skimming security or digital skimming security. Re-emphasizing with our data, it's the allowed paths and the trusted services that are being compromised. In the case of that one that I mentioned, that going after like Polymarket and those crypto wallets, it was a digital marketing firm or email marketing capability. We've seen Google Tag Manager, 30 plus Tag Manager IDs compromised. We're seeing the third party trust as the attack surface because in the case of Google Tag Manager, everyone uses it. It gives a centralized point of control. They can rapidly deploy new changes, propagate changes without developer involvement. They hide in the trust. They hide underneath the fact that it's allowed in CSP, and it can create these complex chains that load other containers. Containers load other containers, opening and created layered attack opportunities. Number two, the scope. Okay. So right now, the way the DSS reads is, hey, if you go and you put, controls in place on your payment pages, you're good to go. You did everything you needed to do. Or in some cases, if you just embed the iframe from your PSP, you should be good to go. Or if you do a complete redirect from your payment page or to the payment provider, you're good to go. All of those things completely overlook everything that's actually happening in the attack world. The bad guy is compromising the site, not the page. The bad guy doesn't need to compromise the payment page in order to get to the payment or in order to get or dupe the consumer into giving them card data. Real world attacks compromise all the things all over your site. There's things everywhere on your site. These scripts are everywhere. We did research in 2024 with Verizon for their PSR. There's like 77,000 scripts running across 7,000 merchant sites, that aren't on the payment page at all. Okay. And so great attack surface for the bad guy, especially if the controls are only looking at one corner of the store and they're not looking across every aisle, right? Really, really important to understand that. Attacks increasingly compromise non-payment infrastructure. Iframes don't stop upstream payment compromise. Site-wide and parent page security remains exposed, and you gotta shift from payment page to site-wide JavaScript governance, right? You take my word for it if you like. Take the word of like some of the leading PFIs in the space. This is Security Metrics. They're saying they did 2,000 forensic investigations involving e-skimming, and in 100% of the cases, the problem was not the payment page, it was the parent page or the rest of the website. Okay. And so we're just seeing this all over the place. And here's, on this notion of like iframe embed and like, okay, great. If the iframe is secure, then, they can't read into the card data. And more, what the bad guys are doing is actually overlaying, their own mimicked iframe and hiding the legitimate PSP iframe, by inputting, a shadow DOM in place. And so, the shadow DOM's there. It maps complex checkout components. They have the ability to then, when the checkout is initiated, put their fake form in place, put their fake iframe in place, and then steal the data before it ever reaches the payment provider. And there was no compromise, at your PSP level, but there was compromise on your site that allowed them to do this. I mentioned previously also more and more silent skimming. I'm running out of time, so I'll kind of speed up, but not a multi-step activity here. This is skimming out directly from the site without there being a two-step process involved. Getting into the SAC-A changes, right? This compliance shell game kind of thing. There was a SAC-A revision, which now with this 1331 revision may be overcome. But the SAC-A revision basically said, 2 months before everybody had to comply, that if you could turn to your PSP, okay, and the PSP could tell you that they had a solution in place to protect your site from compromise, that you didn't need to do 643 and 11.6.1. Okay. That was then subsequently changed, and it said with the FAQ 1588 that, well, it's not that you didn't have to do, 643 to 11.6.1. You should have a control in place. And if you want to find out what kind of control, look for 643 and 11.6.1, or still turn to your PSP. The PSP doesn't control your site. The PSP doesn't have any visibility in terms of the scripts that you're running on your site. They do not have the ability to protect anything other than the payment page. They cannot control compromise script activity elsewhere in the site, and so therefore they should not be able to let you have a false sense of security and think that they've taken care of the solution. Now, the change to 1331, okay, changes how SAC A is even invoked. Now, with the modification that came out about 2, 3 weeks ago, what 1331 reads is that you don't get to just decide as the merchant whether or not you qualify for a SAC A versus a ROC versus an AOC. You have to have a direct conversation with your compliance reporting entity or accepting entity, right? Which would be your merchant acquirer, your PSP, depending upon the how you want to define it. You have to have a conversation with them, and they have to let you know whether or not you can go that route or whether or not you go deeper with like something like a rock, or whether or not you have to kind of be in scope for broader requirements. It's a lot of crap going on in this, sort of assessing and understanding what you need to do. Here's where I would just distill it down to. You need to protect your website against these digital skimming threats. You need a solution that is easy, that does not add a lot of burden, to the organization. You need something that, is trusted around the world. You need something that's informed by a tremendous amount of understanding of the problem. You want something that you can kind of set and forget. You need something that'll help you demonstrate compliance, but ultimately you need something that's going to secure you, and so you need it site wide. And so there's a lot of needs there. Source Defense is here to kind of help you solve those problems. And so I would encourage you, for those merchants that are on this call, engage with us, and let's at least start talking. If you've got a homegrown solution in place and now I've, scared you about CSP, good, because you shouldn't be relying on it. Let's talk about what we can do to help there. If you're using another vendor and they use CSP SRI, as the baseline of their tech, should probably talk about, what moving off of them would look like. If you're completely greenfield, I didn't even know I had to do this. God, I need somebody who can help. We can help you walk through all of it. We can help you get, on the right track. And we can also engage, with your auditors, and talk with them, about the right approaches. The gap is real, because of the way things were written. You might think you're secure. You maybe are compliant, but you're not secure, and you need to kind of fill the gap. And so I'm going to kind of leave it there. I've got, a handful more slides I could go through or whatever, but I'm going to leave it there because I like to get these calls done about 2:45 or about, 45 minutes in, to give you the opportunity to get back with your day. But I want to do a couple things. Steve at sourcedefense.com is my email. Scott read my mind on that one. You can drop me a note. Please do. If you'd like to engage further in conversation, you want to set up a call with, some of our experts, you want to talk a little bit about, what we're seeing at the council level, whatever it may be, you want more depth on this research, you can drop me a line, and I'll definitely, spend the time with you or get you connected to the right resource. I would